Imagine sitting at Christmas dinner, and instead of handing you a bowl, your son-in-law dumps an entire bucket of filthy kitchen scraps on your head and smirks. "Here's the soup you wanted." And instead of shouting, I calmly wiped my face, pulled out my phone, and said only one sentence: "The $1 million gift is canceled." Before we go further, make sure you subscribe and comment what time it is where you're watching from, because what happened next turned a quiet December night into the moment everything in my family changed forever. I had been in my study earlier that same day when Jennifer appeared at the doorway, smiling the way she used to when she was a little girl running to the backyard, hair catching sunlight like a halo. "Dad, Christmas Eve is tomorrow. You have to join us. Everyone's coming. It'll be wonderful." Her excitement felt genuine enough, but the pain in my abdomen reminded me of the ulcer Dr. Richardson warned me about last month. I told her gently I should probably stick to bland food. She insisted she'd make something simple just for me, her expression sweet, but somehow not quite matching her eyes. When she left, I sat in my old leather chair reviewing investments, snow settling quietly outside. My mind drifted to the moment I told her I'd be buying him a $1.05 million home. She had cried. Michael had shaken my hand and told me I was the best father-in-law anyone could ask for. The closing was scheduled for December 26th. A perfect gift, or so I thought. Later, I went downstairs for water and found Michael acting like the house belonged to him, directing a young catering assistant, barely looking at me when I offered help. "We've got it covered. Wouldn't want you overdoing it at your age," he'd said, joking in a tone that wasn't a joke. I quietly went upstairs again, but later that night, I heard whispering. Jennifer and Michael. "Urgent. Tense. We just need to keep things together until closing," Michael said. "It's still my father," Jennifer whispered. "Your father who's been sitting on a $2 million house while we're stuck in the guest room," he shot back. "We've earned this." Earned? That single word echoed through my mind like a drip of cold water. The next morning I called Larry, my lawyer. Everything was still on schedule for the purchase. I didn't tell him what I'd overheard. Not yet. That evening, the house was full of people for the party. My own home felt unfamiliar, swallowed by strangers laughing and drinking like it was theirs. I descended the stairs slowly. Jennifer hurried over, asking if I felt all right. My stomach ached, and I asked about the soup she'd promised. Her entire face stiffened. There was no soup. She kept insisting it was simmering, but her hands wouldn't stop fidgeting. I knew she was lying. I stood near my bookshelf, trying to calm the burning in my stomach. That's when Michael decided to turn me into entertainment, mocking me loudly in front of everyone. The old man and his special needs. Always something about Harold's comfort. Laughter rippled through the room. I remained calm. When I finally asked him to show respect, he smirked, as if daring me to challenge him. Then, in front of a room full of guests, he grabbed a metal bucket from the kitchen, filled with greasy prep scraps, and dumped it over my head. Vegetable peels clung to my face, rancid water dripped down my shirt, and people laughed. Even Jennifer tried to hide a smile. I wiped my face slowly with a monogrammed napkin, pulled out my phone, and sent a message to my realtor. "Cancel the Meadow Road purchase immediately. The $1 million gift is canceled." Michael's smugness faltered as he realized what I'd done. I simply looked at him, then walked upstairs in total silence. He didn't know it yet, but that quiet walk marked the beginning of the end for both of them, and what happened the next morning proved they had no idea who they were dealing with. I woke the morning after like a man who'd been placed under a spotlight. The house felt foreign and small, and trays of cold coffee sat like apologies just out of reach outside my bedroom door. Jennifer knocked softly at first, then harder, voice strained to wood. "Dad, please, I brought breakfast." I let the knocks accumulate until she stopped and the silence thickened. Uncertain it was its own pressure, and I intended to let it squeeze. When I finally opened my door a crack 20 minutes later, I took the tray, locked the door behind me, and did not eat. Instead, I set the untouched coffee to the side and opened the leather notebook I kept for client notes, the one with years of neat columns. I didn't write feelings. I wrote facts. June 2019, $30,000 wedding contribution. October 2022, $50,000 wired for a business that failed within months. Monthly utilities, groceries, and insurance payments labeled with dates and amounts. 2 years of foregone rent for the guest suite. Each entry read like a slow arithmetic of generosity that had been treated as entitlement. Numbers don't forget, I thought. They make clear what niceties try to hide. Over the next few days, I became something like an archivist of my own life, documenting messages, receipts, bills, and casual conversations that suddenly looked less casual. I photographed bank statements that arrived in my mail, kept copies in dated folders, and archived email confirmations. I found a Chase statement tucked carelessly in recycling with a minimum payment flagged and a contact name I didn't recognize. I found a crumpled AT&T notice with a suspended line. I took pictures, time-stamped them, and emailed them to secure account. I watched how they moved through the house now as if I were learning the choreography of predators. Michael leaving most mornings at 10, returning late. Jennifer taking calls behind the kitchen island at hours that spelled work from home, but also a lot of pleading with unknown voices. I started listening to the sounds in the walls, learning when the guest room door opened, when the dryer finished its cycle. What being ignored for months felt like measured out in footsteps. Then I called Larry and set the appointment earlier. That call felt like moving a chess piece. He answered on the second ring, warm and steady. "Harold, everything all right?" he asked. I told him I wanted to move our meeting forward. Something had come up that required immediate attention. He didn't press. He knew enough that when a client like me asked for urgency, there was usually a legal and practical reason. We scheduled January 2nd. In the quiet between papers and phone calls, I also confirmed the cancellation. Donald Carter, the realtor, responded to my terse message within minutes. The Meadow Road purchase was being withdrawn, and the sellers had accepted the cancellation. The $10,000 deposit would be retained under contract terms. Relief was quick and then cold because Donald added something casual and, to me, damning. He mentioned Michael had called last week asking about quick resale values and whether a rapid sale might mean a steep reduction. I felt my skin go thin. Michael had not been curious. He had been plotting. That evening, I listened as Jennifer's knocks became softer, apologetic. I remained unmoved. Let them talk themselves into a corner. Larry had said once in a different context. Let them reveal what they will. So I prepared quietly. I ordered a certified credit report on Michael through legitimate channels I had access to. I requested transactional records where I could legally obtain them, and I hired, quietly, a private investigator to verify patterns I couldn't confirm from inside my house. I filed a copy of Donald's message with my notes. The sense of being violated hardened into a cleaner thing. Purpose. When Michael and Jennifer finally tried to come back into my life with apologetic faces, Michael slick and overly contrite, Jennifer hollow-eyed and swift to promise change. I let them say their lines while I recorded their words in my notebook. Their apology visit turned out exactly as predicted. Michael asked about the house within minutes, like the wound of the bucket had been an inconvenient. Delay rather than the moral line he'd crossed. He was already calculating the next step, hoping my embarrassment could be converted back into currency. I didn't rise to the bait. Instead, I organized the evidence with a care that felt almost pleasant. Dates, times, voice specimens, the realtor note, the credit inquiries, the bank statements. I booked an earlier meeting with Larry and read the ledger aloud to him like a deposition. He listened, tapped his pen, and said what I had hoped. There was cause for action. We document everything, he instructed. We let them move while we control the board. They'll apologize, let them, then move. That night, I slept easily for the first time since the bucket soaked me. Not because the anger faded, but because I had transformed it into a plan that would protect what was mine and, I hoped, teach them a lesson about boundaries, consequences, and dignity, because by the time they realized the house was truly gone, they would have already written their own epitaph. The morning of January 2nd arrived sharp and gray, the kind of winter light that makes everything look like a photograph left too long in the sun. I drove to Larry's office with the calm of a man who had finally aligned his principles with his actions, a calm that felt almost medicinal after the chaos of December. Larry greeted me with the familiarity of nearly 3 decades of financial guidance, ushered me into his office, and waited as I placed my thick notebook on his desk like an exhibit ready for court. For 40 minutes, I walked him through every line. Wedding contributions, business gift disguised as investments by Michael, utilities paid, rent forgiven, behavioral changes, the Christmas Eve humiliation, the overheard conversation about earning $1 million home, the cancellation call, and the revelation about Michael's conversation with the realtor regarding flipping the Meadow Road property. Larry's eyebrows twitched only once when I read aloud the phrasing of Michael's questions about rapid resale and price reductions. When I finished, he asked a series of crisp clarifying questions, then leaned back and said the words I've been expecting. This isn't just ungratefulness, Harold. This is exploitation. Maybe not criminal fraud in completed form, but attempted financial abuse? Absolutely. He laid out a strategy with the precision of a surgeon mapping an operation. First, document everything. Financial irregularities, overheard statements, behavioral shifts, public humiliation, and especially Michael's intent to use the house for quick liquidity. Second, pursue a legal route to remove them. They're tenants at will, he explained calmly. No lease, no rent, no contractual obligations on your part. A simple notice to quit gives them 30 days. Clean, legal, unassailable. Third, he advised preparing for retaliation. People like Michael don't go quietly. He'll try emotional manipulation first, then financial arguments, then threats, maybe even slander. You need to be 3 moves ahead. He suggested we request Michael's full credit report through a lawful investigative channel associated with concerns about potential financial exploitation. I authorized it. Larry nodded approvingly, then paused, studying me. Harold, are you sure you want to see the full picture? It might be worse than you think. I answered simply, if I don't see the truth now, I'll pay for it later. When the report arrived 10 days later, the truth landed like a hammer. $85,000 in maxed-out credit cards, 2 personal loans totaling $27,000, a credit score in the low 500s, and worst of all, a loan application filed 2 months earlier attempting to secure a home equity line against my house, listed my address and falsely implying ownership. I held the paper for a long moment, letting the implications settle into place like bricks forming a wall. Michael had planned to use my property before he even had access to it. The house gift had never been about building a future. It had been about bailing him out of the past he'd buried under debt. I didn't feel surprised. I didn't feel angry. I felt confirmed. And confirmation is far colder than anger. It doesn't burn, it settles. The next days unfolded like the slow tightening of a noose, mine tightening around their entitlement. There's tightening around their panic. Jennifer knocked daily, softer each time, desperate for dialogue. Michael avoided me except when forced, but I could feel him plotting, pacing, recalibrating. They whispered late into the night, voices muffled by walls not nearly thick enough to contain desperation. I watched from a distance that wasn't physical but emotional. I had stepped out of the role they assigned me, the bank, the fallback, the guilt-tethered father, and into the role of the man who was finally done enabling. When they finally came to apologize, their words rang hollow. Michael spoke like an employee rehearsing a statement for HR. Jennifer spoke like someone trying to salvage a safety net, not a relationship. And when Michael slipped, asking about the house barely minutes, after offering remorse, I knew I had them exactly where accountability required them to be. They left the room relieved, thinking they had softened me, thinking time would reopen the door. They didn't know I had already locked it behind them. Over the next week, I cataloged every inconsistency they displayed, every sign of calculation disguised as care. I reviewed the credit report until every line was memorized. I watched Jennifer's guilt battle her fear, watched Michael's panic bloom into sharp edges and muttered phone calls. They were unraveling, and I was preparing. On January 18th, I overheard Michael on the phone, whispering urgently to someone named Tony about a $15,000 debt and a February deadline. Liquidity he'd promised. Liquidity that could only have come from one source, the house he still believed he was getting. That night I wrote one sentence in my notebook, underlined twice. They still think I'm their solution. They were wrong. Because soon they would learn that I was not their solution. I was their consequence. Because the real consequences started when they tried to apologize. The week that followed moved with the slow inevitability of a storm that everyone sees forming but pretends isn't coming. And Michael's behavior became a fascinating study in a man trying to hold together a collapsing illusion with nothing but bravado and denial. Jennifer grew quieter, moving through the house like someone trying not to disturb a sleeping bear. But Michael paced, muttered, schemed, and called every contact he'd ever exaggerated knowing. I heard in the guest room, voice rising and falling as he begged for extensions, promised money he didn't have, and reassured some unseen creditor that the house situation would be sorted soon. He still believed the Meadow Road property existed in his future, as if my silence was a pause instead of a verdict already delivered. On January 25th, the packet arrived, 33 pages of Michael's financial truth printed in unforgiving black and white. I drove to Larry's office to collect it, returned to my car, and opened it slowly. Every page confirmed what instinct had already whispered. Debt piled on debt, credit cards maxed to their limits, loans taken with predatory interest rates, missed payments marked in red, an entire financial life held together by tape and lies. But the line that froze me was simple. An attempted home equity line application, using my address as collateral. He had walked into a bank and tried to borrow money against my home before Christmas, before the gift was finalized, before humiliation dripped down my face in front of a laughing crowd. His betrayal wasn't reactive. It was premeditated. I sat in the driver's seat of my Lexus for a long time, watching winter's sunlight glint off the snow, feeling something inside me click into place. Not sadness, not rage, but clarity. Every doubt I'd given benefit became a definitive line through their names. I returned home, placed the credit report into my locked desk drawer, beside my notebook, and waited. That weekend, surges of desperate whispering came through the floorboards. Jennifer cried late at night. Or maybe she tried not to. The house carried sound in a way that made honesty impossible to hide. Michael's voice grew sharper, more frantic. He needed money he didn't have for reasons he refused to explain. February approached with a low hum of tension, and when the first of the month arrived, the betrayal became bolder. On February 2nd, I heard Michael retrieve the mail, a habit he'd taken on recently, likely because he hoped financial news addressed to me might include something useful to him. And then I heard his footsteps rushing back inside, quicker than usual. 3 minutes later, my study door burst open without a knock. He stood there clutching a certified letter in his fist, Jennifer hovering behind him with a face that looked more like panic than anger. "What is this?" he shouted, waving the envelope like it was a burning fuse. "It says we owe $15,000 to people we've never met for a house we never got." His outrage was theatrical, but behind it was real fear, the kind that comes from a man who has run out of excuses. I removed my reading glasses deliberately, set them down, and said, "Those damages are a contractual consequence of the cancellation. When I withdrew from the purchase, others lost time and money. That is standard procedure." Jennifer stepped forward, tears forming, voice trembling with rehearsed innocence. "Dad, how could you do this? We apologized. We tried to make things right. You ruined our future over one mistake." I stood, measuring my breath, so I didn't laugh at the word they kept using, mistake, as if humiliation were a clumsy slip instead of chosen cruelty. One mistake. I repeated softly. Christmas Eve wasn't a mistake. It was a revelation. Michael threw his hands up. "Oh, come on, Harold. I was drunk. I said I was sorry. What else do you want?" I walked to my desk, opened the locked drawer, and pulled out the manila folder holding the notes and the printed transcript of Donald's revelation. "Do you remember speaking to Donald Carter on December 20th? I asked evenly. "For days before Christmas." Michael's face blanked. "I didn't. What are you talking about?" I read aloud. "You asked what the realistic sale price would be if you needed to move the house quickly. You asked whether $850,000 was achievable. You asked about average days on market." Jennifer stared at him, horror widening her eyes. "You were going to sell the house?" "The house Dad was giving us." Michael stammered, clinging to anything that resembled a shield. "It's normal to be curious. We could do what we wanted once it was ours." My voice hardened. "Except it was never going to be yours. And curiosity isn't the same as planning to flip a gift for cash." I placed the credit report on the desk, between us. There's more. Things Jennifer deserves to know. When I revealed the fraudulent loan application, Michael's entire facade crumbled. Jennifer backed away from him, as if stepping back from a cliff she hadn't known she was standing on. Every lie he had built, every manipulation, every entitlement collapsed into a single truth neither of them could escape. And in that moment, they realized something they had never understood. I wasn't angry. I was done. Because what came next wasn't confrontation. It was eviction. The day I handed them the notice to quit felt almost eerily calm, as if the house itself understood that justice was finally stepping to the door after years of being left outside. March 12th, late afternoon, the hour when sunlight turns a staircase gold and the quiet feels heavier than night. I stood at the bottom of the stairs and called their names with a steadiness that surprised even me. Michael appeared first, guarded, jaw clenched. Jennifer followed with a slow dread of someone walking toward a verdict they already sensed was coming. They sat on the sofa while I remained standing, holding the folder Larry had prepared, clean, legal, unarguable. I told them calmly that Adult Protective Services had visited me because of an anonymous report claiming I was mentally incompetent, confused, easily manipulated, and making irrational decisions about my property. When I revealed the truth, that the burner phone user file the false report had been purchased by Michael, recorded on security footage, confirmed by credit records, Jennifer gasped like air had been punched out of her, and Michael's face twisted into a snarl before he could stop himself. Without raising my voice, I explained that I had taken the cognitive assessment, scored in the 97th percentile, and that the case had been closed as malicious. I let that word hang in the air. Malicious. Then I placed a notice to quit on the coffee table. You have 30 days to vacate my home, I said. Jennifer broke first, her voice cracking into pieces, as she asked where they were supposed to go, how they were supposed to survive with no savings and no support. Michael shouted about rights, courts, coercion, elder abuse, words thrown like darts but carrying no weight, because the law was clean and simple. No lease, no rent, no claim, 30 days. When they were gone, the house felt like it had inhaled for the first time in years. The following weeks were a study in unraveling. Through the walls, I heard their arguments splinter into accusations, fear, and frantic planning. Michael called attorney after attorney, but each one declined the case once they learned Larry was involved. Jennifer paced the guest room with the desperation of a woman realizing she'd tied her life to an anchor rather than a partner. The tension thickened as April crept closer. By April 2nd, when I stepped outside to collect the mail, our neighbor Fred mentioned seeing Michael at a bar with a young redhead, holding hands, leaning close, the kind of closeness you don't mistake for business. I thanked Fred quietly and walked back inside, already dialing Larry. That was the moment I stopped feeling even the faintest trace of sympathy. Betrayal layered on betrayal, until even the outline of the man I once tolerated disappeared. 3 days later, I sat in a cafe across from the investigative journalist Larry referred me to, Amanda Rodriguez, sharp-eyed and calm as she reviewed the redacted documents I handed her. The gambling patterns, the credit card debt, the failed startup, the lies. She asked why I wanted the truth exposed. I told her, plainly, because he hurts people, because he hides behind charm and lies, because sunlight is the best disinfectant. She would verify independently. She said. She did. By April 12th, the Greenwich Time published her expose, not naming Michael, but describing him so precisely that anyone who knew him would recognize every detail. Debt, gambling, fraudulent loan attempt, collapsed startup, lies. I heard Michael's phone ringing downstairs again and again, saw him pacing to the window like a man trapped inside his own burning house. And then came April 14th, the morning the investigator delivered the photographs. Michael and the redhead at a bar, hands touching, foreheads almost pressed together, intimacy caught in still frames. I printed the clearest photo, placed it in a simple frame, and set it on the kitchen table like a centerpiece of truth. When Jennifer found it the next morning, her scream sliced through the house, sharp, guttural, betrayed. What followed wasn't an argument. It was a collapse. Furniture struck walls, accusations tangled with sobs. Michael's excuses dissolved under the weight of undeniable evidence. Their marriage didn't end in a slow fade. It shattered in a single morning, each piece landing exactly where it belonged. And then April 15th arrived, their final day. Michael left first, duffel bag in hand, face hollow, hatred simmering beneath exhaustion. He paused at the door, trying to summon defiance, but found nothing to stand on. Jennifer came next, broken, exhausted, and begging for a second chance, not as a dependent, but as a daughter. She asked to stay, just long enough to rebuild, to change, to prove something. I didn't answer emotionally. I answered with terms: rent, responsibilities, therapy, boundaries, and she accepted them all. Because now she understood consequences, because the real reckoning wasn't Michael leaving. It was seeing who Jennifer chose to become after he was gone. The weeks that followed Michael's departure felt like living in a house that was slowly remembering itself. The walls seemed quieter, the air lighter, and the old rhythm of my life began returning in small, steady steps. Jennifer kept her promise from the very first morning. She paid rent on May 1st with a handwritten check, placed respectfully on my desk without assumption or entitlement. I issued her receipt like a landlord, not a father, because structure was the only way forward. She attended therapy every Wednesday at 4, her car leaving like clockwork and returning 90 minutes later. I verified the first 2 sessions, then stopped. Trust had to be rebuilt brick by brick, but I was willing to lay the foundation. As spring warmed into early summer, she found a job, administrative coordinator for the Greenwich Library. Steady income, real hours, honest work. She showed me the acceptance letter with a pride that reminded me faintly of the little girl who once ran home from school waving her first A-plus test. Slowly, carefully, she began cooking simple meals. She tended the garden with me on Saturdays, learning how to prune roses and pull weeds without uprooting the roots. And every week her posture changed, her eyes steadied, and the person Michael had shaped her into began dissolving. In May, I received a certified envelope from the Stanford Superior Court, Phillips versus Warren. Michael was suing me. His claims rambled through entitlement like a man convinced the world owed him interest on his delusions. Breach of oral contract, promissory estoppel, unjust enrichment. He even assigned monetary value to his companionship and household assistance, as if dumping a bucket of garbage over my head constituted emotional labor he should be paid for. I handed the paperwork to Larry, who laughed so loudly I had to hold the phone away from my ear. He told me not to worry. We dismantled the entire case brick by brick. And on June 15th, we did exactly that. Courtroom 3 besmelled of paper and old varnish. Michael looked thinner than I'd ever seen him, wearing a suit that didn't fit and a desperation he couldn't hide. His attorney's opening arguments were a tangle of phrases about implied agreements and reasonable expectations. Larry's rebuttal was surgical. He cited the statute of frauds, financial documents, the language of the $50,000 gift to his failed startup, and a fraudulent loan application Michael had attempted using my home as collateral. When the forensic accountant took the stand and presented Michael's gambling transactions, maxed out credit cards, and misuse of funds, the air left the room. The judge dismissed the case with prejudice, sharp, final, unambiguous, and ordered Michael to pay my attorney fees. Jennifer waited in the hallway, watching as Michael tried to plead with her one last time. She didn't respond. She simply turned and walked away. 10 days later, she and I sat in my study, discussing my revised will. I explained the trust, the protections, the conditions that weren't punishments but safeguards. She listened with quiet respect, asked thoughtful questions, and agreed without argument. She was rebuilding, and I was witnessing it slowly, like watching a tree recover after storm. By late summer, life found new rhythm. Jennifer secured her position at the library, paid rent on time, kept receipts, attended therapy, and began volunteering at a local literacy program. The house, once heavy with tension, filled instead with the sound of steady progress. On my 66th birthday in early September, Jennifer cooked again, the soup she had promised 9 months earlier but never made. This time it existed. This time it was sincere. And this time her apology, spoken at the dinner table with our neighbor Fred as witness, wasn't performance or a plea, but a confession tempered by genuine remorse. She told the truth about who she'd been, who she'd become, and who she wanted to be. I listened in silence, then acknowledged the apology not with instant forgiveness, but with an understanding that real healing requires continued action. Later that night, she hugged me, the kind of hug that doesn't try to bargain or fix or excuse. I returned it carefully, fully. When the house grew quiet, I took the last cup of soup out to the porch and sat under the September sky as crickets hummed in the garden. The same garden where, months ago, seeds of betrayal had sprouted into humiliation and heartbreak. But now the night felt calm, earned, whole. People say revenge is cold, sharp, fueled by anger. But what I learned is far quieter. Justice doesn't burn, it aligns. It restores what others try to take. It reminds you who you are when others forget. Kindness without boundaries is not kindness. It is self-erasure. And love without accountability is not love. It is permission for harm. Months ago, I stood dripping in garbage while the people I supported laughed. Now I sat clean, steady, and at peace, with a daughter rebuilding herself not through gifts or pity, but through responsibility and courage. I finished the soup, simple, warm, honest, and watched the first autumn stars blink into view. And I realized something small but true. The story didn't end with punishment. It ended with clarity, with boundaries, with a father reclaiming dignity, and a daughter rediscovering hers. If you like this story, tap the like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments what part of this story surprised you most. And if you're ready for another story, click